so soon as age will permit, I will use fire and steel to arrest the destiny of Rome. This legendary oath, a vow of eternal enmity allegedly sworn by a young Hannibal Barca at his father's altar, serves as a chilling and dramatic prelude to one of antiquity's most colossal and defining conflicts, struggle that would shape the very future of Western civilization. Greetings and welcome once again to the Alternate History Channel, your dedicated portal and intellectual nexus for meticulously exploring the profound and endlessly tantalizing what-if scenarios that pepper the great tapestry of our collective past. For those of you who might be joining our intellectual expedition into the corridors of speculative time for the very first time, we extend a most cordial invitation to become a part of our ever-expanding fellowship and vibrant community of dedicated history aficionados. You can easily accomplish this by clicking the subscription button located below, and crucially, activating the notification bell. Simple action will ensure that you are always alerted whenever we embark on a new scholarly investigation into the intriguing, unexplored byways, the pivotal junctures, and the forgotten crossroads of alternate history. For today's immersive excursion, are carefully calibrating our temporal navigation systems to transport us back to the era of the Punic Wars, that defining historical period characterized by a cataclysmic, generation-spanning struggle between the two colossal superpowers of the ancient Mediterranean, the established opulent and dominant maritime dominion of Carthage, and the ascendant, disciplined-based military juggernaut of the burgeoning Roman Republic. You are undoubtedly familiar, at least in broad strokes, the epic and near-mythical narrative of Hannibal, the brilliant Carthaginian general whose name became, and remains, byword for audacious military genius and unparalleled tactical acumen. He is celebrated eternally for his almost unbelievable traverse of the snow-covered and treacherous Alps, a logistical feat of staggering proportions he accomplished with his multinational army and his famous war elephants. And, of course, for his subsequent and seemingly unbroken series of devastating, psychologically shattering triumphs on Italian soil. Yet, amidst all the chronicles of his legendary campaign, a single, persistent, tantalizing question has echoed through the halls of history and occupied the contemplative minds of scholars, generals, enthusiasts for well over 2 millennia. What if Hannibal, in his moment of greatest triumph, had taken one final, decisive, earth-shattering step forward in the immediate, panicked aftermath of his most crushing and catastrophic victory over the Roman legions? He had marched his battle-hardened army directly on and successfully subjugated the city of Rome itself. Strongly advise you to secure your positions and fasten your metaphorical seat belts as we are poised to launch a deep and immersive speculative exploration into a divergent reality, a fascinatingly different world in which the mighty Roman Republic, the presumed master of its own destiny, brought to its very knees by the overwhelming might of Carthage and the singular, unmatched brilliance of its greatest general, Hannibal Barca. Therefore, any additional preamble or delay, let us collectively step across the threshold of imagination, leaving our own timeline behind to enter this captivating and profoundly altered alternate history. Carthage, the venerable, ancient, immensely wealthy maritime empire, whose meticulously planned urban ruins now lie near the coast of modern-day Tunisia, had for centuries stood as a powerful, sophisticated, and potent counterweight to the burgeoning ambitions of the Roman Republic on the Italian peninsula, established generations earlier by intrepid and resourceful Phoenician colonists. The city of Carthage had masterfully leveraged its superb, strategic position on the North African coast, forming itself into an immensely wealthy and profoundly influential nexus of pan-Mediterranean commerce. Its mighty and justly feared fleets, arguably the envy of the ancient world, commanded the vital maritime trade arteries that stretched from the Pillars of Hercules in the far west to the ancient port cities of the Levant in the east, thereby creating and maintaining a sprawling network of economic dependence, colonial outposts, and formidable political influence. However, the relentless and seemingly inexorable expansion of Carthaginian interests, notably its determined and muscular efforts to secure complete and unchallenged dominance over the fertile, grain-rich, strategically priceless island of Sicily, inevitably and predictably created a dangerous flashpoint with the equally ambitious, aggressive, expansionist Roman Republic. These escalating tensions, fueled by competing economic and security interests, finally and violently erupted into the protracted and incredibly costly conflict that history remembers as the First Punic War. This grueling, decades-long struggle was fought primarily in a series of massive and innovative naval engagements, ultimately concluded with a hard-won Roman victory. Triumph was a pivotal moment in history. It not only secured the coveted prize of Sicily for Rome, but far more importantly, signaled Rome's shocking and decisive emergence as the newly dominant, preeminent military force in the Western Mediterranean, setting a bloody and ominous stage for future, even more devastating confrontations between these two irreconcilable powers. The single most extraordinary, consequential, and unforgettable figure to emerge from this crucible of escalating conflict, and arguably in the entire storied annals of Carthaginian history, the aforementioned Hannibal Barca, son of the great general Hamilcar. He ascended to legendary, almost superhuman status during the ensuing conflict, Second Punic War, a war he himself had instigated, where he unleashed a campaign of such audaciousness and sustained tactical brilliance that it remains a core subject of study in military academies across the globe to this very day. Undeniable masterstroke, the move that defined his genius, was the breathtakingly daring and logistically staggering crossing of the Alps, a frozen, treacherous barrier that he surmounted in the harshness of winter to descend upon an unsuspecting Italy from the north, an avenue the Romans had confidently believed was utterly impassable and had thus left relatively undefended. This single, brilliant maneuver allowed him to bypass Rome's primary coastal defenses and strike with terrifying speed and effectiveness directly at the Republic's agricultural and demographic heartland. Hannibal's string of shocking victories against bewildered Roman commanders culminated in his undisputed magnum opus, the legendary Battle of Cannae, singular engagement, a true masterpiece of battlefield command. He executed a perfect tactical double envelopment, a maneuver that lured a vastly superior Roman force into a prepared trap and resulted in the near total annihilation of the largest consular army Rome had ever fielded. The losses were almost incomprehensible, a demographic catastrophe that plunged the Republic into its darkest, most desperate hour, shaking its political foundations and leaving the city of Rome itself, seemingly, on the very precipice of ultimate and irreversible defeat. And yet, it is precisely in this moment of supreme, unparalleled triumph, with his enemy utterly broken and demoralized, Hannibal made the most debated decision of his life. He did not, in fact, his victorious army the remaining distance to lay siege to the city of Rome itself. This critical, and to many historians and armchair generals, baffling decision, this apparent hesitation at the gates of destiny, has been the subject of the most intense and passionate historical debate for centuries. Several compelling and plausible theories have been advanced by scholars to explain this fateful choice. One prominent and widely accepted line of reasoning, championed by many practical-minded historians, posits that Hannibal, for all his unrivaled genius in orchestrating open-field battles, simply did not possess the highly specialized, resource-intensive siege equipment, the formidable catapults, the towering ballistae, the mobile siege towers, the heavy rams, nor perhaps the sheer overwhelming numbers of fresh, placeable troops that would be absolutely required to successfully assault and breach the massive, ancient, and robustly fortified walls of Rome, metropolis prepared for just such a desperate defense. A protracted conventional siege, he may have reasoned, consume precious time and resources he did not have, bleed his veteran army white, trapping him deep in enemy territory as Rome's remaining allies inevitably regrouped. A second, perhaps more nuanced and strategic interpretation suggests that Hannibal's grand, overarching strategy was never actually the physical capture and occupation of the city of Rome itself. Instead, he may have aimed to achieve a more sustainable, political victory. His goal, by this logic, was to systematically dismantle Rome's confederation of Italian allies, the very source of its seemingly inexhaustible manpower. by repeatedly humiliating the Roman legions in the field and demonstrating their shocking vulnerability. He hoped to prove to these allied and subject peoples that Rome could no longer protect them, thereby causing its entire political structure to implode from within as allies defected, forcing the isolated and powerless city to sue for peace on Carthaginian terms, ceding its overseas territories and accepting Carthaginian hegemony. However, for the specific and declared purpose of our alternate historical inquiry, we are consciously and deliberately diverging from this known, established path of history. We are instead envisioning a profound scenario, a pivotal moment of divergence, where Hannibal, perhaps emboldened beyond all caution by the sheer, staggering scale of the slaughter his army had just inflicted at Cannae, and perhaps sensing a unique, fleeting moment of total psychological collapse within his ancient foe, makes a different, fateful, and timeline-altering calculation. He decides to override the cautious counsel of his generals, to gamble everything, to seize the fleeting moment, capitalize on the raw terror he has sown across Italy. He decides to attempt a direct all-or-nothing assault on Rome. This single decision, in this divergent timeline, fundamentally changes the entire course of subsequent human history, strengthened immeasurably by his definitive victory, and propelled by a renewed, almost messianic sense of urgency and destiny. He rapidly begins to consolidate the necessary resources for this final, ultimate undertaking. He dispatches his swiftest riders, not only to his established Carthaginian allies in the south of Italy, requesting immediate support, but more importantly, he sends persuasive emissaries, bearing promises and threats, to the very Italian peoples who ostensibly still served Rome, but whose loyalty, he knew, now shattered beyond repair. He persuades them with the irrefutable logic of his victory. The Roman eagle is irrevocably falling, and a new, Carthaginian-led order is rising to take its place. Let us therefore venture boldly and imaginatively down this divergent path of history, unexplored tributary of time, and meticulously explore the cascading, world-altering consequences of a reality in which Hannibal, the son of Hamilcar, conquered Rome. In this new, alternate reality, Hannibal, name was already synonymous across the Mediterranean, with exceptional and near supernatural strategic aptitude, meticulously orchestrates the complex and daunting logistics for the siege of Rome. He fully comprehends that Rome's defenses, even in their currently panicked and severely depleted state, remain formidable. The city is ancient, its walls are strong, and its people are famously stubborn. He knows that a conventional, attrition-based siege might prove lethally protracted, potentially lasting years, could ultimately prove disastrous for his own army, which despite its victories, is still operating deep within hostile enemy territory, far from its naval supply bases. Consequently, he conceives and then proceeds to execute a brilliant, sophisticated, relentless three-pronged approach designed to ensure the city's inevitable downfall. First, and most immediately, he masterfully leverages his staggering, psychologically devastating victory at Cannae as both a powerful diplomatic carrot and a terrifying stick to attract a new, decisive wave of allies to his cause. Substantial portion of Rome's Italian confederates, who were already profoundly disillusioned by the Republic's consistent and catastrophic military failures, against the Carthaginian general, who were personally reeling from the severe, irreplaceable losses their own cohorts had endured in the grinding disaster at Cannae, now become exceedingly receptive to negotiation. Among these wavering and resentful peoples are the fiercely independent and martially powerful Samnites, a hardy, dwelling warrior society who had for generations long and bitterly resisted Roman domination and now sensed a unique, golden opportunity to break free from the suffocating grip of Roman control permanently and regain their ancient sovereignty. Joining them in this great defection are the numerous communities of the Bruttiae, situated in the toe of the Italian peninsula, remain deeply and viscerally resentful of Rome's aggressive and often brutal expansion into their ancestral lands and coveted forests. Hannibal, a master of both war and politics, expertly capitalizes on this seething, widespread, and long-simmering discontent. He employs a sophisticated and calculated combination of diplomatic overtures, subtle but clear intimidation of those who might hesitate, and, powerfully of all, concrete, ironclad promises of future, guaranteed autonomy, the restoration of their confiscated territories, and a prestigious, protected position of influence and partnership within a new, decentralized, Carthaginian-led Mediterranean order. As a direct and immediate result of this diplomatic offensive, several key factions and peoples, most prominently the powerful Samnites and the vengeful Bruti, formally defect from the Roman Republic and pledge their full military forces, their carefully hoarded stockpiles of grain, and, most critically of all, their own local engineering resources and captured Roman siege equipment to Hannibal's cause. Masterstroke significantly bolsters his ranks with tens of thousands of fresh, motivated troops, and in a single move, completely solves his most pressing logistical dilemma, the lack of a proper siege train. Secondly, Hannibal initiates and maintains a relentless and terrifying campaign of psychological warfare, meticulously designed to shatter Roman morale from the outside in. He purposefully continues and dramatically escalates his established strategy of methodically ravaging Rome's outlying territories, creating a wide earth belt of desolation and famine in a vast ring around the city itself. This brutal action serves a critical dual purpose. It leads to massive and immediate disruptions in Rome's vital, locally grown food supply chains, which were already strained to the breaking point. It successfully forces Rome's few remaining, demoralized defensive forces to be spread perilously thin as they try, vainly and fruitlessly, to protect their agricultural heartland from Hannibal's flying columns, thus weakening the city's central garrison. In perfect parallel to this land-based strategy, the Carthaginian navy, which had been hesitant for much of the war, is now decisively emboldened by the news of the definitive victories on land and the defection of Rome's allies. It sails in force from its ports in Sicily, Sardinia, and Carthage itself to establish a suffocating, iron-clad naval blockade at the mouth of the Tiber River and along the entire western coast of Italy. Critical move effectively and completely severs Rome's access to the vital maritime trade routes upon which it had long depended for overseas grain, particularly the massive shipments from Sicily and Ptolemaic Egypt, thereby strangling the great city's last and most important lifeline. The final, decisive, concluding part of Hannibal's grand strategy involves laying formal, inescapable siege to the city of Rome itself. Now commanding a substantial, combined, multinational force of his own battle, hardened Carthaginian and African veterans, his loyal Iberian and Gallic mercenaries, tens of thousands of newly acquired, highly motivated Italian allies, and, critically, equipped with a formidable and overwhelming arsenal of siege engines, battering rams, mobile towers, catapults, and ballista, many of them captured from Rome itself, or provided by his new partners. Hannibal commences the long, grueling, methodical encirclement and assault on the walls of Rome. The city is now completely and totally cut off from the outside world, starving island surrounded by a hostile, vengeful army led by a general who seemed, to the terrified populace, to be an invincible demigod, the very scourge of the gods. As the desperate, agonizing siege drags on, month after agonizing month, the once proud metropolis, proclaimed ruler of Italy, begins to rot and collapse from within. It succumbs first to rampant, crippling food shortages that turn quickly into outright famine. This is followed by the horrifying, inevitable spread of disease, typhus, dysentery, within its overcrowded, unsanitary walls. Finally, as all hope evaporates and horrific stories of cannibalism begin to circulate, the city's famed social cohesion shatters, giving way to bitter internal dissension, violent food riots, a complete civic breakdown as desperate factions turn on one another. The beleaguered city, starved into submission, riddled with disease, utterly broken in spirit and body, is at last compelled by its surviving leaders to do the unthinkable, the act that would echo in infamy forever. Rome, the eternal city, formally and unconditionally surrenders to Hannibal Barca. In our meticulously constructed alternate scenario, ultimate victory, the fall of Rome itself, an event that was, in our timeline, utterly inconceivable, sends profound and instantaneous shockwaves across the entire ancient world. It brings about immediate, irreversible, fundamental changes in the power dynamics, not only within the Italian peninsula, but across the whole of the Mediterranean and beyond. Formerly subjected and cowed allies, from the diverse tribes of the Gauls in the Po Valley to the ancient Greek cities of Magna Graecia in the south, seized this unparalleled opportunity, this power vacuum, to joyfully reclaim their long-lost independence and sovereignty, thereby shattering the complex confederation of alliances that had always been the true bedrock of Roman military and political power. Others, perhaps more cautious, observing the new and stark political reality and the catastrophic fall of their former master, prudently and pragmatically choose to align themselves with the victorious Carthage, proactively seeking security, trade advantages, potential benefits under the new, undisputed hegemon of the Western Seas. Rome itself, seemingly indomitable power that had appeared destined to rule the known world, reduced overnight to the humiliating and pathetic status of a client state, its foreign policy, its economy, its very future dictated by the whims of Carthaginian governors and the strategic interests of Carthage. Rome now firmly and securely under his military control, Hannibal, acting as de facto proconsul, sets about the monumental and complex task of restructuring its governance and society. In a move that showcases his political acumen, he rejects the simplistic, brutal calls from many of his soldiers, and indeed, from hardline political factions back in Carthage, had demanded that the city be utterly razed to the ground, its people sold into slavery, and its very name erased from history as a final act of revenge. He chooses to adopt a far more pragmatic, subtle, and far-sighted approach. He recognizes the city's immense strategic, logistical, and symbolic value. A functioning Rome could serve as his new capital in Italy, a base from which to manage his new sphere of influence. Thus, Rome is permitted to retain some small and carefully managed degree of its former autonomy, primarily allowing it to manage its own local, internal civic affairs. However, is merely a veneer of freedom. All key positions of real political, financial, military power are now firmly and decisively overseen by his most trusted Carthaginian officials, or, more cleverly, by those few loyalist Roman aristocrats who had pragmatically and opportunistically allied with Hannibal during the final, desperate days of the siege, and once revered Roman Senate, the very emblem and engine of the Republic, is allowed to continue its existence and its debates. It is now a hollowed-out, impotent institution. Its powers are severely and permanently curtailed. Its debates are merely advisory. Its proceedings are conducted under the constant, watchful, and intimidating eyes of Carthaginian overseers who hold the true power of veto and decree. Most importantly, the formidable and legendary Roman legions, the very engine of the Republic's relentless expansion and the source of its martial pride, are largely and systematically disbanded. Their eagle standards are taken as trophies. Their weapons are confiscated and melted down. Their battle-hardened veterans are forcibly demobilized and sent back to their farms, which are often now ruined. Rome's deeply ingrained martial culture, a societal framework that had prized conquest, military glory, and civic duty above all else, is deliberately, methodically, and gradually suppressed, actively discouraged, and replaced over time by the dominant Carthaginian cultural emphasis on administration, efficient taxation, and, above all else, the generation of wealth through commerce. Meanwhile, as Rome is thus permanently eclipsed, its great rival Carthage, in this alternate scenario as never before, with its greatest, wealthiest, and most dangerous rival decisively pacified, disarmed, and neutered, the Carthaginian Empire experiences an unparalleled and protracted golden age of profound prosperity and unchallenged global expansion. The incredibly fertile agricultural fields of Italy, particularly the great estates, or latifundia, of the south in Campania and Apulia, effectively become the new, expanded breadbasket of Carthage, securing its food supply for centuries to come and bolstering its state and private economies to previously unimaginable heights. Massive, sudden influx of new wealth and resources from Italy fuels a spectacular boom in construction, public works, art, and philosophy back in the capital, Carthage, into the undisputed center of the world. Moreover, Rome's shocking and total capitulation sends a clear, unambiguous, terrifying message to all other potential rivals and kingdoms. dotted around the Mediterranean. The squabbling Hellenistic successor kingdoms in the east to the tribal confederations in Gaul, and the wealthy mining centers in Iberia. They are all strongly and prudently encouraged to either seek a formal, beneficial alliance with Carthage, or, at the very least, to keep their peace and accept Carthaginian dominance. Recognizing the new, undisputed military and economic master of the seas. Fascinating political and historical twist. Carthage does indeed become a true empire, but it does not necessarily follow the Roman model of direct, brutal, total military conquest followed by forced assimilation. Instead, it evolves into a different, perhaps more modern, kind of empire, a vast, sprawling global realm held together primarily by a complex and intricate, sometimes fragile, web of diplomatic alliances, binding bilateral trade agreements, a network of subservient, tribute-paying vassal states, with the opulent city of Carthage itself sitting comfortably at the glittering center as the dominant, mediating and financial power. It establishes and fiercely protects a sprawling network of bustling, protected maritime trade routes and strategically placed, heavily fortified naval bases that span the entire Mediterranean, from the tin mines of distant Spain to the ancient ports of Phoenicia, ensuring its absolute, challengeable military, and more importantly, its economic and commercial supremacy over the known world. However, as is so often the case in history, the very totality of this success, this removal of all external threats, contains the subtle and poisonous seeds of its own future problems. The sudden and complete removal of the unifying, existential threat that Rome had always represented to the Carthaginian state also serves to expose, indeed to dangerously exacerbate, the deep-seated, bitter, and long-standing fractures that had always existed within Carthage's own wealthy, factional, oligarchic society and political structure. The city's complex, republican-style governance had always been a delicate balance of power between several competing interest groups. Now, with no common enemy to force unity, these powerful factions, representing the ancient, conservative, land-owning aristocracy, the aggressive, expansionist military leadership loyal to popular and powerful generals like Hannibal himself, and the immensely wealthy, pragmatic merchant oligarchs who controlled the sea trade and funded the state, begin to vie openly, bitterly, and destructively for power, influence, control of the state's vast new revenues within the city's councils and assemblies. Lacking the focusing presence of a common, dangerous enemy, their long-standing rivalries intensify into open political warfare. Consequently, the Carthaginian homeland, even at the zenith of its power, experiences debilitating and dangerous bouts of political instability, crippling corruption as factions seek to enrich themselves, damaging internal conflict that sometimes spills over into civic unrest. These internal power struggles, combined with the immense, precedented administrative pressure and logistical strain of managing such an extensive, diverse, and geographically dispersed network of colonies, allies, protectorates, and trade routes, periodically and severely put Carthage's newfound, globe-spanning dominance to the test, proving that winning the empire was easier than holding it. Hannibal, in the meantime, the architect of this new world, leverages his historic, godlike victories and his profound, almost fanatical leadership skills to consolidate his own personal power, both in his new Italian domains and, by extension, political influence back in Carthage itself. His strategically calculated and surprisingly successful strategy of moderation with the defeated city of Rome, combined with the undeniably successful and immensely profitable expansion of Carthaginian influence across the entire Mediterranean, earns him immense, bred respect and a significant, fiercely loyal personal following, especially among his multinational soldiers, who view him as invincible among the newly allied Italian peoples, who see him as their liberator from Roman tyranny. He is seen by many not merely as a brilliant, relentless conqueror who brought the mighty Rome to its knees, but also as a visionary, forward-thinking state builder, a new Alexander who had ushered in an entirely new, pan-Mediterranean era of Carthaginian peace and boundless prosperity, the Pax Punica. But is the immutable fate of any historical figure who wields such a significant, transformative, and near absolute degree of influence, his actions, his popularity, his decisions also attract numerous, powerful critics and bitter, jealous enemies. These enemies conspire against him within the fractious political landscape of Carthage, where the established merchant oligarchs and landed aristocrats deeply fear his king, like popularity and his control over the army. And outside of it, the still proud, subjugated Roman populace, and among the still independent Hellenistic kingdoms of the East, who now rightly see this Punic, dominated New World Order as a mortal threat to their own existence. Thus, in this captivating, divergent, formed alternate reality, Carthage, not Rome, emerges as the leading, undisputed, and central power in the Mediterranean, setting the entire course for a new and radically different chapter in the history of the ancient world. A chapter written in a Punic script is abundantly clear, upon reflection, that a world in which Hannibal had successfully conquered Rome would have been a world fundamentally, profoundly, perhaps unrecognizably different from the one we know today. Carthage, not Rome, would have held the reins of power over the Mediterranean for generations, perhaps for centuries to come. The dominant culture, the ad lingua franca of trade, law, and diplomacy, the legal systems, the philosophies, the art, the intricate trade networks of the entire classical age would have been profoundly influenced, not by the familiar Latin traditions, but by the Semitic, Cantile, Punic, and Phoenician traditions of the Carthaginians and their diverse polyglot allies. The subsequent rise of Christianity, theology and its spread, the preservation and transmission of Greek philosophy, indeed the entire political and cultural framework of what we commonly refer to as Western civilization, would have been altered in ways so fundamental that we can barely begin to comprehend them. Yet, it is also wise to remember that the conquest of Rome itself, as monumental an epoch, defining an achievement as it was, not have automatically and magically ensured unending, unchallenged, and eternal prosperity for Carthage. As history teaches us time and again, great power comes the immense, complex, and perennial challenge of maintaining it. Carthage's dominance, built as it was more on commercial networks, treaties, alliances than on overwhelming military occupation and cultural assimilation, would have been perpetually and severely put to the test by its own debilitating, ridden internal politics, and by the constant, simmering, unavoidable external pressures from other rising powers, and the inevitable rebellions of its subjects. The legendary Hannibal Barca himself, even despite his unparalleled military genius and his now proven, visionary political leadership, would have found himself facing his own formidable share of new, familiar, and daunting challenges, transitioning from the relatively simple life of a general to the complex, treacherous life of a statesman. He would have been forced to navigate the shark-infested currents of this new world order that he himself had forged, where he was now the central pillar holding everything together. However, one thing is absolutely and indisputably certain: the tales, the epics, dramas, and the histories of this alternate timeline, with Hannibal as its chief and central architect, would have been no less dramatic, no less complex, less endlessly fascinating than the familiar, cherished stories of our own Roman-dominated timeline. This exercise offers us a tantalizing, valuable, humbling glimpse into a past that could very well have been, and it stands as a powerful, enduring testament to the immense, almost unbelievable, often terrifying sway that singular, contingent events, and indeed singular-driven and uncompromising individuals can have on the unpredictable, contingent, ever-branching course of human history. As always, this is the Alternate History channel. We remain steadfastly dedicated to exploring the most intriguing, challenging, and thought-provoking what-ifs of history. You have enjoyed this particular deep dive journey into a past that might have been. Strongly encourage you to make sure to give this video a supportive thumbs up, to subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so, and, importantly, to please share your own valuable thoughts, your insightful theories, your creative ideas for future topics in the comments section located below. We invite you to not forget to hit that resonant bell icon so that you will not miss a single moment of our next scholarly expedition into the fascinating, endless, an endlessly captivating world of alternate history. Next time, keep history in mind and never stop questioning the past.